Well, hello, everybody. Welcome back. This is our return episode, second episode of Looking at the Labyrinth, looking around the labyrinth. And Cliff has joined me again. My friend Cliff is over in Seattle. And we just wanted to take a minute in terms of opening and revisit briefly our first presentation. And just to sort of show you, this is the overall map. I've been continuing to build on it today, and you can see this little red line here. I'm hoping to get over to this side of the map today and talk about neuroeconomics. And the last time we did the map, we were over in this part, and we were talking about outside-in robots and AI and WGBH Boston and the origins of public television, and what in the world are we listening to, and what might we be listening to if we start to be part of an outside-in robot program. And to start off with, I wanted just to remind us of this image from a paper about AI regulating human emotion. And in this paper, we talked about the idea of networked sensor systems, and that there was an intention to actually regulate emotion through actuators connected to sensor technology. So cyber-physical systems would watch us, evaluate our behavior, and then try to use things in the built environment or people around us to adjust our behavior into something they felt was deemed more optimal, I guess. And this particular paper that we talked about was titled "Sensor Information Fusion by Integrated AI to Control Public Emotion in a Cyber-Physical Environment." Wow. So you've got sensors fused with AI, and they're controlling you in public through your environment. And so that's this paper. It was from 2018, and it was published, surprise, surprise, in Sweden, although the names look maybe Korean. Sensors, I guess, is the name of the journal, surprisingly. And in this journal, one of the use cases they were talking about initially was kindergarten students and kindergarten classrooms. And so we're very aware, based on my research in human capital finance, that they're looking to shape the character of children through technology. And one of those use cases that's connected to pay for success finance and pre-K impact bonds is EduCare and their relationship with Hatch Education and their We Play Smart tables. So those aren't specifically mentioned in the paper. I'm just saying, as strange as it may initially seem to sort of contemplate that you would have sensor technology managing 5-year-olds, the reality is that those technologies are already in place and linked to some of these human capital investment schemes. So when we talk later about frequency, because you can see in this image all of the sensor technology and the EMF that will be coming off of these devices, and increasingly these sensors will become hidden in shoes, hidden in toys, hidden in furniture, not only to track the children, but to track how children interact with each other and the environment. Kind of the way electricity has then gone into the walls. And most of the day you use electricity, but you're not really aware of it being a presence. We've just accepted it. And this is going to be the new level with cyber-physical systems. So do you have anything to add on that? Just revisit, Cliff.
That's a lot of technology aimed at children.
Yes.
And that paper, controlling public emotion, so some kind of feedback. So I just have a question for you. So they've got the sensors all over the walls, reading the environment, photographing the children's faces, listening to what they say. They're giving all this information to an AI, and it wants to affect you through the built environment. How does it do that? Does it make suggestions to the teacher, who then feeds them to the children? Or is that one possible path? I was just trying to imagine the pathways for the sensors when the AI is grabbing all the data and then choosing how it's going to shape your emotions. Does it then speak to the teacher, or does it put things up on the screen and encourage the children to walk through a playground? Yeah.
Well, it's interesting for me to think about, because I don't know that they have all of the use cases planned out at the present time. I can imagine they're using a lot more of these QR codes and hall passes and things for older students. So, once you have a student ID with a QR code, you can have Sorry, Cliff, I'm going to pause. I don't know why I lost my access to my directions on this. So I'm just going to, I'll edit this out. For some reason, it lost my toolbar. Okay. This bit. Hold on a second. I'm learning on navigating this stuff.
Yeah, no, take your time.
Okay. Let me get in a little bit more detail. Okay, so you were asking about how the sensors and the actuators might present. We're at the very early stages. Okay, so I'm saying these are things that they're talking about that they would like to do. They haven't fully been implemented. They are building smart classrooms for college students. They were putting sensors in chairs so that they could sense if a chair was occupied and if people were fidgeting in the chair. It might send an alert up. They've been talking about having children have wearables and headbands. Sort of brainwave headbands for group work. So that, those groups that always let you down, like when you end up being the one that does all the work on the group project, like they would know based on the brainwaves of the headband who was actually actively participating. It was checked out. There's maybe some aspects you're like, yeah, I was the one who always did all the work on the group project and the other people freeloaded. But with the brainwave headbands, they would know. They might have heart monitors on the playgrounds so that they would get biometric feedback activity on the kids and who had a higher heart rate than someone else. And we can imagine how some of the recent health impacts around wearables with clotting and heart conditions might play into that in the future, which is for our safety. We'd like you to wear this wearable to track your pulse rate while you're on the playground or while you're doing sports. It's interesting. So my child, they had a wonderful preschool. It was actually quite lovely. And, when you're managing a bunch of 3 and 4-year-olds, like you do need to have some structure. Like it can't just be totally random. In fact, where they had been when they were 2.5, it was much less structured and very chaotic. So this wasn't rigid, but people, the kids who were there, and it was a multi-age group, sort of like 3 to 5.5. They knew how to navigate the space. There were sort of rules, and there was some like traffic coordination. Like not everybody could be in the climby part at once. Not everybody could be in the library corner at once. Not everybody could be in the block corner. And so the teacher, she had a really good way about it. The kids, they had a classroom culture and they had a little tag, and there were little clothespins that would be clips on the items. And if all the clips were full, with the kid, then you couldn't go in that spot. And maybe if a kid stayed there all time, the teacher would go and like move them along and say, maybe it's time to go over and hang out with the fish aquarium or something. But there was somewhat of a system, but you can imagine what that might look like with these wildflower Montessori preschools, where all of a sudden you have the sensors that are, it's not a kid with a little laminated card without a QR code, just like, regulating who's in what area of the classroom, because it was pretty independent, but actually it's the sensors. And what if, somehow there was a wearable, like it sent a signal to the teacher, like, oh, Johnny's back in the block corner, like we've been trying to make him go to the library corner. He won't go there. So like, you better, and who knows how all of these sensors, but they're smart. And then the idea is that they will optimize you. Like maybe Johnny really wants to spend a lot of time with the Legos, and that's his passion at the moment. Like kids get a fixation there, it doesn't want to read, and so then is it within what we're going to do to start nudging kids into those spaces? And the key thing with the impact finance space is that they're really looking at emotional regulation and managing not just what children learn, because in the future, they're sort of imagining that we're going to just outsource our intellect to this AI. I mean, if they are able to proceed as they imagine, people in positions of power, it actually is going to be to their disadvantage that we have our own independent intellect. They don't actually like that. They'd prefer to have guided individuals that they could use for their purposes, but not think too much. But they really are interested in what our emotional state is and what our social relations are. And so I think increasingly that's what the sensors are going to be used to monitor and regulate. So this is a different part of the map that I'm in today. And, the way I said that I use these maps is I usually take a certain event and then I build off of it. Like who was at this event? where, and oftentimes these events happened in the past. So I can look and see, okay, what was the training of these people? What is their background? What did they bring into the room that day? And then what have they done since? And so this was an event that was brought to my attention by somebody in one of the YouTube comments. I think maybe Christine did it. So thank you very much for that, because it was actually an excellent suggestion. And it was a panel about neuroeconomics. And I've had neuroeconomics on my radar for a bit, because I'm, it's a lot of it comes out of Penn, and that's, my backyard. And so I started to look to see, like, who was at this neuroeconomics event? Where was it held? And what were they saying? And I did a recent blog post where I spent, it was about a 2-hour talk, including the Q&A. And there was so much in there, Cliff. And like, I know you listened to some of it. And so I thought, well, let me pull out short bits with things that I thought were really compelling statements that they made that had quite significant implications for our inquiry. And ask people what they thought about it, what they heard these people saying, and how it applied to what we know of this larger program. Because again, this is 2007. Things have progressed a lot since 2007, and get people's feedback. And I was really, really happy that people, a number of people gave really good responses that actually actively informed the creation of the map, including Roderick, who brought my attention to this human energy project up here. So I added that there. And the person, their call handle is, let me see, it's a little bit more obscure. Coco Tube One Zakazny. And they brought my attention to the Sigmund Freud University down here. So this is part of sort of the borderless collaboration. And I'm very grateful, because I've been asking for this. And so it's great to see people step up and contribute. And then we were able to sort of build new layers of knowledge onto what I had started with. So from Christine's suggestion to these couple of contributions, and then glomming it on to the other parts of the map that I had. So yeah, I'm going to just pause for a second. Cliff, did you have anything you wanted to add?
So I would say, just to for myself and for others, to kind of like just bring my attention to the map. So what was your starting point? Like when you pulled back, I could see the big map. So where was the kind of center point that you started building out from?
Okay, so before the last time, I've done a couple of podcasts where I've talked about this initial event called Descent, Democracy Reboot, European Currency and Democracy in 2014. And there were a number of presenters at this, and this relates to digital currency, but not just digital currency as we understand it as the central bank digital currency, but really this idea of social currency and community currencies and tokenization of the commons and of life. And in my opinion, the creation of metadata tags through the exchanges, financial and value exchange, to feed artificial intelligence through these impact markets. So it started, the initial core of the map is here. And one of the presenters, and this is a bit roundabout, but his name is John Clippinger. And on another talk, we'll have to go into John Clippinger's background a little bit more. But he did his undergraduate at Yale in the 60s. He was very active in the civil rights movement. His thesis is really interesting. And this is in Wikipedia. If anyone can figure out a way to get a copy of this thesis, I would love to read it. The title of his 1967 thesis at Yale was called Steersman and the Stars. Steer, like steering a boat. Steersman and the Stars, a cybernetic analysis of myth. And so this, I think, has a lot to do with things today, because you have this convergence of ritual and symbolism of the millennia before the Enlightenment era that is being melded with scientism and increasingly cybernetic control systems. Okay. And this is what's going to come out in the event that we're looking at around neuroeconomics. He went on to Penn, here where I live, and he got a PhD in computational linguistics. And I'm increasingly paying attention to linguistics because language is representative of our worldview, of our symbology, of how we approach one another in the world through language. And it is that language and that essence of the structure of language and culture that they're trying to give to the robots. So linguistics, computational linguistics is really important. Now, Mr. Clippinger is now at MIT in the human dynamics group. A lot of this is about social physics, and he's involved in blockchain and telecommunications. And, he was, he's in a lot of things, working closely with Sandy Pentland, Alexander Sandy Pentland, who is sort of a pioneer in the social physics space. So we have Mr. Clippinger, who was a speaker at this Descent event in 2014. Now, one of the things that he had been up to was something called the Law Lab. The Law Lab was housed within the Berkman Klein Center for the Internet and Society. So Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard. So he's at MIT. Harvard and MIT collaborate very closely. I often think that like Harvard sets the policy and then MIT builds out the sensor networks to make it happen. And so really what he was dealing with is essentially going to be the smart contract layer of Ethereum. And his collaborator in this law lab, and granted, this lab at Harvard was funded by the Ewing Marion Kauffman Foundation. And that foundation was actually the one organization that paid for this pre-K paper about pre-K finance in 2012. It was with the Ready Nation Working Group that was backed by someone who had worked for Paul Tudor Jones. And in this document from 2012, they're actually talking about innovation in early childhood finance, and that they would develop, it says, I'm quoting, the working group's goal is to facilitate the creation of, quote, invest in kids bonds, so bonds of children, that can be underwritten individually or aggregated into asset-backed securities, which can be invested in by individuals and institutions worldwide. And this is sort of my smoking gun when people say like, oh, is this really what they're planning? And I said, well, here's this paper with this organization that's connected to America's Promise. It's national. It's connected to many of the largest philanthropies in the country. And they're saying, yeah, 2012, we are totally going to create a bond market in children. And we're going to package these bonds, and we're going to slice them and dice them and sell them on the global market. And so this is real. And the fact that the same Ewing Marion Kauffman Foundation, which is in Kansas City, was backing it, that's significant, right? And because how would you run a bond market? How would you do the prediction and the risk monitoring and the facilitation at scale if you don't have a smart contract layer? So that's what's coming with Web3 and Ethereum. And so the tokens that are going to be happening, it's going to be a much more complex landscape than what people might be imagining as digital dollars. It's going to be something much more complex. And
could you relate that back to that image of the children in the school? So one element of them sitting in this fully censored room and all this data being collected about them, and the data, like they're trying to develop ways that the data can feed back to move the situation in the room, whether through putting things on the screen or talking to the teacher, however they do it, so that they can, it's like kind of emotional behavioral training. Is this the money side of that? Is this the like how they're going to benefit financially off of that process?
Yeah. So when I first started doing my research, I thought that it was mostly about money. I mean, my understanding was, okay, so we know how this goes. The last game was real estate, right? We're gonna bet on real estate all around the world, and real estate debt. Really, they were betting on the debt, and so it was something that was taking a real thing that was someone's home and abstracting it as debt, and then packaging these debt in all sorts of creative ways and betting on it until that fell apart. And that fell apart, in the 2007, 2008, and with tremendous implications, and in many ways laid the groundwork for what we're seeing now, because we have the gig economy. A lot of people lost homes and they never recovered the financial ground that they lost at that time. And so really they're going to be set up for this universal basic income. This happened first. Then initially I was thinking, okay, well, what is bigger than real estate? The wealth has become even more concentrated in the meantime. What's bigger? Well, the only thing that's really that you have more of than real estate is people, or maybe poor people, and vulnerable people, children, old people, veterans. How can we make money off of poverty? And they're like, okay, well, you just turn it into a game. And as long as all the major players, the UBS Bank, Deutsche Bank, Goldman Sachs, Federal Reserves, as long as the central banks are all in on it, totally, they're in on it. And a lot of the rules of this game were set in the Greater Philadelphia, by B Lab and the Rockefeller Foundation through Global Impact Investment Network. So they set up the game. And then they needed some rules. And so what they needed was the premise that you were going to improve people, and you would represent that as data on a dashboard. Well, now people.
So that's the quote philanthropy part. You're going to improve people, help children.
Right.
Okay.
And so what they do is then they hire academics, at esteemed universities. These aren't hacks. These are Nobel Prize winning economists. And they say, hey, could you help us out with an equation for our game? And so they said, well, okay, so if you're going to bet on it, you need something that has some variability, like that moves. Even if all of this is kind of a story, and what Jason would tell us is this money stuff is all fundamentally a story. We live inside about what money is. But the new story we're going to tell about this game is it involves improving. And the thing is, we can't get enough improvement with like a once a year test score. We need dynamic data in real time. And so, what we're going to test, and we can't really test IQ, because even if honestly you believed an IQ is a legitimate measurement of someone's quality as human capital, it kind of hardens up around the age of 8 to 10. This is from James Heckman. He's the one who developed the Heckman equation. And he said, we can't really use cognitive measures, but what we can change is character.
Oh,
you can change character all day long.
Right.
And they can do it through digital technology and gamification. And so that's why you see surveillance play tables is that, and measuring the social emotional states of children. And there's another gentleman, Clive Belfield, who set up another equation. He's at Teachers College, Columbia University, and he set up an equation for social emotional learning. So they're manipulating kids' mindsets for global finance. I mean, that's the plan. It hasn't come to scale yet because they need digital identity. They need everyone on a learn card, on a blockchain learn card, to have your own little digital twin, so we can, squeeze you around and make you fit our understanding of what your behavior and mindset should be. And you're the leader, and you're the follower, and you're the gritty one, and you're the creative one, and everybody gets a crystal program, and then you get optimized to your assigned pathway. And so I thought at the time, okay, so this is about people making money. They're betting, because some people, once they package these things in asset-backed securities, they can bet against you. They can say, I don't think Johnny's going to be an engineer. He might love Legos today, but what we don't know is based on his DNA genomic coding, he has a family propensity for dyslexia, and he'll never amount to anything. And then people can bet against you. And I mean, these are all stories that we live inside, but this is the reality of what this game is that we're setting up that affects people's real lives. And we can see from the intense harm created by the financial crash of 2008, what happens when all of that harm gets leveraged into children, the elderly, veterans, people who have mental, who are struggling with addiction or mental illness or what have you. I mean, it's quite. It kind of takes your breath away but we shouldn't be shocked, because this is not like this has never happened before. It's just no one's talking about it. Does that make sense? So Jim Heckman's equation, and I talked about this early on and sort of in the pandemic, because at that time I was like, impact finance, that's the thing. But I didn't have a full awareness of swarm intelligence and metadata tagging and the nuance of blockchain identity and how they could use it to steer you through cybernetics. And ultimately advances in computing that would move towards optics and photonics, where perhaps our biology would start to become a computable resource, like a collective computable resource for overall management, like at a population level. And so now I realize it's, when I was scratching the surface of, oh, you're betting you're going to make money, this could screw up a lot of people's lives. Oh, and actually what you're trying to do is mirror our emotional lives and our capabilities into the simulation world so you can give it to the robots. Right? Yeah. We'd like for you to live in the robot so that eventually we have some of these humanoid robots in the back. They're pretty clunky right now, but I think if we could capture as much of you as we can get inside and out, we could teach those things to be more, to function along the lines of human decision making, which we'll come back to with Paul Glimcher and neuroeconomics.
So is that, so against a background of like trying to build out, capture all the data in this classroom, there's a financial element that's doing like impact, creating it as a market to make money. And you're saying, but there's also a deeper purpose to it, that they're trying to gather all that information about children and how they learn in order to feed it to this AI manager that they're creating in the background, and also to feed it into, to make more lifelike the physical manifestation, the robot in the room, so that it has more. So
I don't have that paper per se. If you look at, I've done some work with Leo around Ocean Protocol. Leo has done a lot of good research over at Silicon Icarus about Cello and Ocean Protocol and leveraging impact data, including impact data around education, particularly targeting girls in the global South. And the intention is to feed all of this data into something called Ocean Protocol. And then you can have AI as a service, and it will be supposedly private and safe. And then this pool, this ocean of data will be able to be drawn upon for pattern recognition and analysis. And you can do that through sort of AI as a service. But a lot of that data is actually going to be data about human capital. So the sales pitch will be, oh, you can sell your data. Like maybe you get reimbursed. Like if your data set, because when you were in third grade, you were part of a cohort of people whose pay for success deal fed into Ocean Protocol. Well, maybe you get some micro pennies every quarter for every time somebody uses that data set to train the AI. But they're training the AI to be like a 10-year-old girl, or something. Like they'll have that. And Ben Goertzel has been very clear. Ben Goertzel is working with these folks and SingularityNet on these AI trading protocols of impact data. So while and he is the one that's developed the Sophia the robot, and that's a humanoid robot, and I think Grace, her little sister, and their minds, the minds of these humanoid robots that are coming from Hanson Robotics, they're blockchain. So if you can imagine the geometry of a cloud-based mind, that anything Sophia learns, anything that is learned by any of the 1,000 Sophias anywhere in the world is part of the robotic hive mind. And once one robot has learned that task, it's immediately available to all other 1,000 of Sophias. That's pretty intense, right?
Pretty intense.
That's pretty intense. So do you need to go?
Nope, not at all. Sorry.
Okay. No, that's okay, because I can pause. Cloud minds, hive minds, humanoid robots. It's a lot more than just making money. It's about steering our attention away from this while they do it. I mean, I think that's a lot of what the swarm intelligence is. It's like, here, let us give you let's like boom, 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 hit you with a bunch of other stories that entangle you and keep you away from looking at this story. Because ultimately, and I'm not just saying this because I think I'm important and I want you to like my story better, but if they achieve this idea that they can leverage cyber physical sensing systems of natural life on the planet into the AI to feed it to a humanoid robot with a blockchain brain, like we're getting a little close to those like techno horror shows, right? And we're doing it all within the cloak of do-gooderism. And that's what's so challenging about like the identity politics, of which, as a progressive and someone in a city that I acknowledge has many, many social ills, oftentimes manufactured and managed that way on purpose towards a certain end, it's hard to thread the needle of saying, yes, there are tremendous problems with the education system, with the employment system, with the health system, with the housing, with the, the way in which people have access to the medical care of their choice, huge problems. But these systems are not going to solve them in a way that leads to us being more human. It will solve them, quote unquote, in a way that will make us less human and the robots more human.
And the financiers making money along the way.
Yes.
Yeah.
And eventually these financiers aren't even real. They're not even like, they're portfolios, they're abstract objects. It's like the more yes, there are people attached to these portfolios who like are getting maybe 6-figure jobs off of it, but it's a machine.
But and you're not saying this is some speculation about some possible future. You're saying they're building it. Look, they're building it now. This is the system that's being built beneath your feet right now. And,
right.
and yeah, so it's not a fantastical, like I looked at the world and I had a science fiction point of view, that maybe this is, you're actually looking at what they're doing in these rooms, high level rooms.
What they're planning. Like some of it's doing and some of it's planning. Yeah. I mean, the question is like, can they scale the edge computing? Can they scale these sensor networks? Can they develop token transfer systems that are fast and efficient and cross-border and can be fractions of, like there are many moving parts here. So I'm not saying this to be nihilistic, but what I'm saying is when Harvard is funding a law lab of contract, like a layer of smart contracts, and it's being done by the people who'd like to aggregate children as bond products, that we should pause and pay attention, because these aren't insignificant people.
Yeah, that's really clear. That's really clear.
Yeah.
And there's, who doesn't what family doesn't have to take into consideration the room that they're walking their child to and what they're really handing that child into. Yeah.
And the thing is, the early child care providers wouldn't want this. I mean, I can't imagine anybody who's doing preschool or K-12 education or even higher education who would be like, oh yeah, I'd like to feed, I look at my, the people that I spend my day with as human capital finance products. They don't. They look at them as human beings. And so all of the people who are managing these systems will also be judged and bet upon in terms of their self-improvement. They're going along with the program. Where are they on the leaderboard? And the systems of accreditation, continued education, all of that is baked into this. So it's fractal. It's like, it might start with the 3-year-old, but then it's the teacher of the 3-year-old, and then it's the credentialer at the state department office, and then it's the person at the US Department of Education, and then it's UNESCO, and then like it just keeps going out, and then every person is going to be looked at by the sensor network on how good are you at this job of us tapping into the being part of human, which is what we talked about last time with John Trudell. Like, how good are you delivering the product of the being part of human, folks? We're counting on you to do the program.
So everyone's being drawn into this, not just the child in the classroom, the teacher, the one who's making the grants, like everyone's being drawn into this game that they're creating.
And I think that it's going to cause so much psychic harm that it will affect people's health. It will affect people's mental health. It will affect the stability of people's family life. It will affect civil society. And yet the irony is that we're saying that we're doing all of this is because we care about children. We care about democracy. Like, we care about these things. I'm like, but I don't think you understand what this actually is. If you could see it, like, look at my map, like, walk with me through this labyrinth and let's look at it, So let me keep moving on a little bit. So
yeah, sure.
We have the lab of smart contracts. So remember, we have Mr. Clippinger with the steersman and the cybernetics and the myth, right? Computers and mythology. He's doing the law lab with Oliver over here. And like, does Oliver have an awesome name for the job he's doing? His last name is good enough. It's like a perfect name for someone whose background is in the law. And he's affiliated with the Vermont Law and Graduate School. And his focus is actually brains and neuroscience and morality. So laws, how your brain works, how you imagine the law, how you imagine moral things, right? And working in the smart contract layer, right? Because what we're doing is we're fixing your neurons to manage them within this moral compass that we've created. Only we're not going to admit to ourselves that it actually is immoral, that they've invited us into a game that is the end goal is that natural life doesn't exist anymore. That's actually not a moral game, but they're inviting us in and asking us to play inside their game board. He wrote for, it was a book of essays that went to press in 2008, published by Princeton, again, esteemed university press. It was called The Moral Markets. Moral Markets, the critical role of values in the economy. So I think we need to look at the ESG finance, and I would invite people who maybe are trying on the lens and have been wearing it for a while that this is a China issue with social credit scoring, that perhaps since a lot of this came out of MIT and Harvard and New England, that the redirection at China was a direction away from our own culpability, our own entanglement in this unfolding system that has a lot to do with Ivy League universities, both in New England and in California, namely Stanford. And the idea of a moral market, for the people who are tempted to sort of point their finger at the government being the problem, once you start treading into moral markets, then what we're talking about is inviting faith institutions, inviting, linking morality to civil society in ways that might start to get complicated in terms of the ethics of these faith institutions and finances and money. And at this point, I'm going to just take a moment that might seem a bit out there, but I think it actually is really important if we're talking about would you like to be a sensor in my outside-in robot so I can monitor your emotion and optimize you to metaverse life? I have some friends in Utah who are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and the institution of the church itself is very much deeply embedded in human capital finance and the technology and virtualization and synthetic biology, many aspects of things going on in Salt Lake City that I've talked about extensively in the past. But from the scriptures, and this is actually, it's not from the Book of Mormon, but it's another writing of Joseph Smith. It was called The Pearl of Great Price. That was the book, and it was Moses 4:1, and it was something called Satan's Proposal. And this was brought to my attention, and I thought it was a really interesting thought experiment, and it's sort of central to it's a central story in the faith of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And essentially in this, it's a prequel to the mortal era, and it is about the rebellion in heaven. And there's sort of this contestation between the two sides, and one is which that Christ will be crucified for people's sins, and that there's agency in terms of how they go about it. But Satan said to God, like, I have a different offer here. Like, my offer is all of mankind will be redeemed, all of them. And if you imagine some of these digital identity ads that we hear, no one left behind. No one will be left behind. We will guarantee that everyone will go to heaven. And how will that happen? Well, it will happen because we will make people be good. I have the way. Everyone will be good, and everyone will get to heaven. And in my understanding from these friends, that it's generally understood within the church that actually that Satan's proposal is not the optimal proposal, because it actually deprives people of agency. And that if someone comes and says, would you like to come into my outside-in robot? I'll make sure I'll make you the best you can be. You should probably step away from that room, because it might actually be something that evokes this proposal, which is you will give up all agency to be part of something that is ultimately not part of a sacred program. So I think that that story is actually quite interesting. I found it very interesting to think about it in terms of what these anti-life machine things, whether it's a networked system, might be proposing. That it sort of, to me, embodies this idea of no one gets left behind. But by the way, it actually was Satan's proposal. So it might sound good at first, but even though being flawed and navigating our way with agency comes with its own price, it's worth it in the end. So I don't know. Do you have any thoughts about that, Cliff? I just found that it was a really interesting.
You know, I'm trying to like sort of listen from the point of view of someone listening to the talk and trying to think what their questions might be as they try to follow. So this, I think the comparison you're making is that, you know, maybe Satan's proposal had a plan for managing your behavior so that you get to heaven. And there, and that the way that meshes with this is their AI, who will be put in charge of all the data, biometrics, sensors in the room, human robot walking around, will have a plan for adjusting your behavior so that you don't get left behind. You know, so that, but it's handing over our agency into the care of someone who says, oh, I'm going to get you to heaven, or I'm going to get you to safety and security, and you're going to have.
You don't even have to think too hard about it. You don't even have to just trust me.
Really, so like, here's the little door, just come into the labyrinth. It's all been designed. We're going to walk you through it. We're going to teach you how to move. We're going to teach you how to behave. We're going to teach you how to be good, how to make good decisions so that you can get to the, you know, so that you can go forward in the thing. And the idea, you know, so the idea of agency becomes like almost moot. Like you get to make some choices about, you know, like how you move in the labyrinth, but once you're in that game. Like, so right. The initial loss of agency is tremendous. And so if in a small classroom, they're basically saying, let us get all these sensors in place so that eventually we can let this manager, this AI intelligence, or, you know, like Satan, so that we can give them enough data that they can optimize you to bring you out the other side of the education system or the other side of life in good shape and in good standing. So
good health. We'll make sure you're fit. We'll make sure you're mentally sharp.
We'll look after your mental health. We'll look after your physical body. We'll do all of this stuff. You know, just give us your life, walk this pathway, let us read you, and we'll get you to the end. It's a little bit crazy, right? But
the thing is, it's also like you have to be willing to realize that life itself can be a little messy, right?
Yeah, there has to be.
I mean, I've had a few instances where, you know, you make a misstep and you're trying to mend things, and it seems like, oh, if there's a misstep, then it's something is set aside. And I'm like, well, but then that's expecting a level of perfection, right? Like that is, if we're expecting a level of perfection from our other human beings, that we never make a misstep, then ultimately what we're asking is to live in the outside in robot where everybody goes to heaven because everybody is good all the time. And to me, that seems a bit like the Stepford Wives or something. Like if you showed up in that neighborhood and you, that wasn't your way, and you'd start to get creeped out if you looked around and everybody was perfect all the time, and you think something actually isn't right here. Nobody's arguing, like nobody gets a little pissy with someone, you know, nobody is sad or whatever. And that you would realize that actually that's an artificial world that we're in. But you have to live not in the everyone goes to heaven, and you have to navigate it on your own. You have to risk. You have to put yourself out to actually risk failing other people, risk being hurt, being open to reflect and find the path again when you get off the path. There's the plus and minuses of agency, but yeah, it's not always easy. But I think if we had it easy, then it I don't know. I think it'd be creepy.
Well, yeah. And plus also their promise to deliver you to the goal of heaven or health or all of that is really questionable. Like really, you're the middle manager that's going to get me to heaven or get me to financial freedom or get me to, I'm just supposed to put all my faith in you. And then I can turn down, you know, my natural sort of agency and just learn to follow rules. And I think the shadow of it is already there, because there's institutions that are managing behavior now. And so the shadow of it's already there, and you make a mistake with someone and their basic response is like really upset. Don't you know the rules? Like, can't you just behave? Can't you just do but you're saying in natural life, we need to allow for and have some spaciousness for people around us to make mistakes.
Sometimes we learn the most stuff from a mistake.
Yeah.
Like an honest mistake. Like if you're not making mistakes, like I don't think you actually have opportunities to grow as a person. Like if you just knew everything, like your life is going to be pretty small if you feel like you know all the things already and you never, I don't know.
Yeah. The machine kind of like pathway clocks every move you make, remembers every move you make, and keeps trying to like shape your behavior to do what it wants. But it's not very kind. You know what I mean? It's like, it's really invasive. It's really constantly watching you, constantly making adjustments, constantly trying to keep you on path. It doesn't feel like there's much freedom in that, to explore, to go a different direction, to sit still for a while, to do something different. I was thinking about that guy who said, the thing about decision makers. He wanted the universal decision-making kind of theory of everything. He was really upset that he couldn't teach these traders to make good decisions that would lead to these optimal financial outcomes. And so he wanted to figure out how to train them. And the neuroeconomics piece was really lighting him up. He's like, maybe this is the way we can.
Well, I was on that. Oh, go ahead.
No, well, it's kind of like being asked to submit to an intense training program so that you behave correctly in a game somebody made, right?
Right. So, but it's not your game.
It's not your game. You're just going to be busy doing your best not to fail at the game. And it's not, for me, it doesn't look very enticing. It doesn't, the more I see of it through your view, the less I want to be a part of it. It's not, I don't feel, whereas on the other side of that, I've talked to young people who are at Naropa University about some of this. And they said, well, look, everybody I knew in college would happily get out of their body and into the digital metaverse if you could just give them a pathway. He's like, people would volunteer right now to just be like, no, let me go be in the metaverse. Like abandon the messiness, the organic messiness and like some of the chaos, the human path, and just be in these rule-based, path-based, behavioral-based tracks. It's a little scary.
Exactly. Well, and now, I mean, starting in the 1990s, like we have the cognitive neuroscience, right? They've got these tools, Cliff, that they're starting to look at tiny, tiny, tiny things, right? Like now we're talking like nano stuff and micro stuff. And like, we can look at individual nerves and we can start to manipulate you at that level, or at least tell ourselves that that's what we're doing with our tools. We can try to represent you materially as a set of firing neurons, and we can link that to an economic market. And I would say that's the thing I wish that the folks on the conservative libertarian side knew, is that the free markets that you're sort of clamoring for to get the government out of the way so you can have this market-based economy, is that you don't realize that it actually is going to be your biology. That these individuals intend for these free markets to be running with nanotechnology in your biological systems.
Yeah, talk about micromanaging. You're going to have somebody like, making adjustments neuron to neuron, betting, just.
I know. Like it's a very technical approach to life. And, I will just say, like I have a number of these talks, but someone said, Bill Watson, on one of the comments, he was saying, what seems to be missing in all these arguments, these are the people we're going to talk about, is relationship to spirit, the notion of human character and what's to become of it in the coming era. I'm very uncomfortable with programmed character formation. It's not real organic, it's phony and mechanical. These neuropsych programmers are engineering minds, tinkering with the natural order. I clearly see where they're going with this and why it feels very dark. In theory, fascinating and exciting. In practice, rather frightening. and in my opinion, a highway to hell. So yeah, that's the
Wow.
same proposal, right? Thank you,
Yeah,
Bill.
that's really well said. It fits right with what we're talking about. Yeah, it's really well
Exactly.
said. Yeah.
And so there was this other event. So yeah, we've moved from the descent. Who was at that descent event? Well, John Clippinger. What's John up to? Well, he's working on smart contract law with Mr. Goodenough, and Mr. Goodenough is about moral economies, and ultimately the moral economies are going to be modulated through these neuroeconomic systems, or that's what they imagine. And so there was this other event that happened. It was a panel in 2007, and that's in this dot here in the middle. And I'll just say, for starters, that it was housed within something called the New York Psychoanalytic Society and Institute. So that's this dot here. And so that's interesting to me, because I actually had done an infographic a while ago. And I'm not going to get into this in grand detail here, but I'll share a link to this map. And if the link to this infographic is in there, if you want to spend some time looking at it. But I do think that Vienna has a particular role to play in what's coming. And it relates to physics and waveforms. And waveforms that relate across many areas of the waveforms of matter, the waveforms of thought, the waveforms of economic cycles and econometrics, the waveforms of music, and that these are embedded in Vienna and in Austria broadly. And it has a lot to do with the Austrian School of Economics, systems engineering. There's now a lot of research going on in crypto economics, so the crypto space and blockchain, in cybernetics, this idea of the circular economy, that in the name of saving the planet, everything will be within a cybernetic accounting system. And then psychoanalytics, which is a thought form, right? Another kind of waveform that's being manipulated. And and it links to money and logical positivism, which is like a material reality that is based in logic, which is the smart contract layer. And ultimately within the track and trace system, this atoms for peace. So there's a lot based here, and I'm not going to go into all of it, but I think it's useful to know that when we're talking about psychoanalysis, even though it might seem a bit out of the ordinary to think about it also in connection with music, with economic cycles, with cycles of matter, with management of social systems through systems engineering and digital money and track and trace technology that could be the outcome of the Cold War radioisotope tracking, that I think all of these things are coming together in this idea of a circular world where everything is contained within a circuit that these technicians hope to manage, that it is not an open-ended system of abundance, but that it has to be a closed system of austerity and control and management by human nature. And so this discussion of neuroeconomics, I think, really needs to be situated within both Vienna, psychoanalysis, cybernetics, and econometrics.
Yeah, a closed system, a managed system. It's almost, I don't know, it's as if they're asking us to give our agency over into a game, and they're using every aspect of the world, science, psychology, to design this game. Like, these conferences are contributing toward this gamified world in all these various disciplines, and something about like giving your agency over through participation in the game board that they're creating.
Yeah. And the game theory was refined through the Cold War. I mean, I think a lot of the threat of nuclear annihilation was very much about refining these equations related to probability and statistics and risk and gaming that are now going to be applied to these innovative financial markets, right? In the financialization of anything that might absorb a nanotech tracer, that they can get their hands on. If they can sprinkle their magic dust on it, like, they're going to track it, and they want to put that in the game. Yeah, it's not just about your phone, even though it's going to start with the phone. It's something much broader. And so the New York Psychoanalytic Society houses, or used to house, an entity called, and I don't know how you pronounce this. It's spelled Philoccetes. So I don't know if it's Philocities. The CT part is throwing me off a little bit. Or Philocities, Philocities. But it's actually, Philocities was a myth, a Greek myth about an Argonaut and a hero in the Trojan War who was wounded. He was bit on the foot by a snake. And so the people he was fighting with left him like abandoned him on an island thinking he would die. But he had Heracles' bow and arrow. And it turns out that the warriors actually needed that bow and arrow. Later, the seer said, you actually needed that thing. So they have to go back and try to convince Philocities to get back on the boat with the bow, so that they can go fight the war. And he's very bitter about it. But eventually he agrees and he gets on the boat. So it's an interesting choice of story for this center, which ultimately is now bankrupt, but their videos are still online as an archive. And it was the Center for Multidisciplinary Study of the Imagination. So think about that, Cliff. What these folks are studying. Now their institute has lots of different panels on lots of different topics. This one just happened to be on neuroeconomics. But they must understand the power of an imaginative story to change the world. Like, they wouldn't focus their whole program on imagination if it wasn't important.
Yep.
And I think that from what I saw through my child's education in the Philadelphia public schools, and I'm not saying it was the fault of the teachers, because for the most part, they were doing what they were expected to do. But they were there to essentially dampen children's imaginations. Like, the education process was about conforming to a standard. And if you were going to be imaginative, like, I think that the imaginative stuff really, I mean, occasionally you get a group project where you could be imaginative, like do a play or do a diorama or do something that you could actually be a little bit original with. But most of it was conforming. And I think it's because this system understands the power of the dynamic interior life of people to imagine a different reality, and in imagining that different reality, put on a different lens and make the world different and get out from under their game. Yeah, I think in your imagination, you can get off their game board.
Yeah, so pressing down in a way, pressing against imagination and rewarding for conformity. Yeah. For doing the task in front of you, doing it in the allotted time, doing it the way you were asked to do it, so rewarding conformity. And so here's the initial cost, like right off the bat, the cost of giving over agency to a game board they created. You have to leave your imagination at the door and get used to conforming, and satisfy yourself with the rewards you get for conforming. What a loss. What an immediate loss.
But see, if you imagine that maybe what's happening isn't about expanding human potential, like bringing, watering every flower, waiting for every blossom to open, but it is actually to put it in some sort of lamination form, flatten it, dry it out, make a representation of it on a dashboard and feed it to a machine. It makes sense, because actually the people with the imagination are the people who are incredibly powerful. And they may not even realize how powerful they are to have that, whether you're artistic, and I include art, visual arts, musical arts, creative arts, all of that. That's, and I think that we have been taught to devalue that, or only value it now under social prescribing, value art, the Bloomberg art program, right? Like, if someone comes and gives you a fellowship or money or a thing, then it's validated as authentic. But that is simply the art that will be allowed to uphold the program. So, so I want to take this minute. So here is Elizabeth. So we have several people who are part of this panel. We're going to talk about Paul a little later on. In all of the features, Paul was Paul here was the one who spoke out the most. He made the strongest impression. I think he's the one who is considered sort of the father of neuroeconomics, and he got his PhD in cognitive psychology at Penn. I think he was the first one to get that. So we'll get back to Paul a little bit because I want to spend a little bit more time on his project. And then we had William Brown, who was formerly a researcher, an economist with J.P. Morgan. And so there wasn't a whole lot that I could find on him, but he was on C-SPAN in the 90s. And he was a pretty high level economist with J.P. Morgan about human decision making. And I will point out, just for context, I've done a number of talks with my friend Lynn in Dallas, and that J.P. Morgan Chase is, one of these big banks. Here's an article from 2019 where JP Morgan is putting a lot of money into, shocker, AI. So, they're clearly in the mix on this. And Dallas County Promise is one of these important pilot career pathways, these cybernetic human capital pathway programs. You can see in this, again, young woman, they're really targeting women of color. So looks like a young Latina woman, thumbs up. She's got her graduation cap on. And the promise itself up here is this little box, right? And later on, we'll look at the crystal. They want to put you as a crystal in a box, and it's a box like a blockchain. It's also kind of like a hexagon, and it has credentials, and it has a little cap, like the little graduation cap with the tassel hanging down. But I think that box is actually representative of your digital twin as a Voronoi polyhedra in the blockchain. And JP Morgan has been doing the investments in these cybernetic plans for human capital development. And in this, the blockchain system that Dallas is using is called Greenlight Credentials. So that's some of the context for William. And then we have Alberto Bicin, who is at NYU. Paul is also at NYU. NYU's Tandon, New York University Tandon School of Engineering is the home of GovLab. And GovLab is a center that's doing a lot of the electronic government, data-driven government, open source government, evidence-based solutions. These folks aren't in the engineering school. Paul is in the medical school, and this gentleman, I guess, is just in the regular NYU. But he's a professor of economics in econometrics, and you can see a little bit from his Google Scholar page. Some among the papers, these are mostly from maybe 10 or 15 years ago, but they're talking about the economics of cultural transmission, right? Culture. This AI thing is interested in what our culture is, and how culture is transmitted, because I think ultimately the next cultural transmission is to the AI. We're culturally transmitting to the AI. How wealth is distributed, how people make decisions around consumption, and skewed wealth distributions, right? Like, if that's not ironic, like at NYU, right, studying skewed wealth distributions, like as if New York City isn't sort of a primary focus of that, like wealth disparities and the way ethnic identity and labor market outcomes for immigrants. That's another impact investing area. So that's what Mr. Bicin is working on. And then Elizabeth Phelps also works with Paul Glimcher, and she's at Harvard. She's a cognitive neuroscientist at Harvard, and she's working on effective computing. And I'll read this from her biography. It says that her research is about emotions that color our lives. And color is interesting because, again, we're moving into optics and photonics. Even subtle everyday variations in our emotional experience can alter our thoughts and actions. Uncovering the impact of emotion and effect on cognition, she aims to enhance the understanding of cognition and provide insight into social processes and psychological disorders. Now, I would pose that essentially the future that they're creating is going to ask people to live in a world that is actually insanity, right? So then, is it sane to accommodate yourself to an insane world? Or is it sane to resist an insane world? I mean, that is sort of a question that we should ask ourselves. Going on from her bio, it says, second, how do our emotions alter what we remember? So it's emotion and memory. And how do our decisions and actions change? Are they changed by our affective states and emotions? Okay. So she's looking at this also from the lens of economics, neuroeconomics. So we've got emotion, we have learning, we have memory, we have decision making. Now, think of all of those things in the context of a 3 or 4-year-old in a Head Start classroom full of sensors. So
it just feels like all of this research is being adapted to a market economy, like human emotion in an how to anticipate its usefulness in an economy,
yeah.
or take a human being full of emotion and mental processes and how to like track all of that and adapt what you learn about it so that it can be used and moved and managed in an economy, like that part of the game. Like, who wants to be used in that way? Who wants their life represented by all these researchers so that so everything they know about how we live and love and laugh can be applied to a particular market and some very micromanaged behavioral training, and that's their plan to get us all to heaven.
Well, and I would say, I think the story they're trying to set up right now is that, well, guess what? In the future, we will have automated a whole bunch of jobs. And so really the only quote unquote work you'll have is to be good. Can you be good? And the robot would like to watch you so it can learn to be good too. If you could just be good under total surveillance inside your body and outside your body and in your mind and through these wearables, that'll be enough. That'll be your new job. And the reality is that some people might be comfortable with that. Like some people, there are people who, and I won't say I don't think I was quite at that level, but like you're conditioned to social expectation. I was somebody who got good grades. I wasn't a butt kisser, but like I liked being a good person. I liked being somebody who, and then I realized later that actually that wasn't to my advantage because I was simply agreeing to be in a game that wasn't ultimately going to be healthy for myself or my family, unfortunately, or my society. But we do have these reinforcers. There's a lot of people who would be like, well, I don't have any problem with that because I am a good person. I don't mind being watched. I'm totally good. But they don't understand, like that's when I went to, and I did that site visit in New Jersey and I compared Ocean Grove, which was a Methodist tent revival summer camp from the 19th century, where a good time, and I'm not saying this in any kind of criticizing way, but you would go there for community and choral singing in the big wooden building and a rousing sermon. And that's your idea of fulfillment. Meanwhile, on the other side, we've got a casino and rock music and an arcade and a boardwalk. And for some other group of people, that might be their fulfillment. And so what happens when you're 3 years old and some equation has decided to put you on a path, only like you're totally the choral singing person and somebody put you on the boardwalk? And your whole life, you're like, but looking for the path that was your path that you didn't get on because someone said, no, you're on this path. And yeah, maybe you would have been super good on the path that you were born to, but it wasn't going to be your choice. And that's what I'm trying to ask people, because a lot of this is going to be baked into churches and faith communities who will say, well, of course we want people to be good. You want people to be bad? You want people to eat junk food and be fat and lazy and stupid? Like that'll be how it's framed. Like you must not care about people because you just want them to just do whatever they want and just be bad. And I'm like, no, there's some other choices involved. So.
And who wants to be given into the hands of an artificial intelligence and allow it to design my walking path through the labyrinth, through life, toward its idea of what is good? Like the thing is not even, it's a complete like construct. It's not human at all, but they want to allow it to read enough of my data to pick an early path from like 3 years onward and direct me in this direction. so that I don't get to be a choral singer, or they direct me into this, I think people aren't really that clear on how much the loss of agency relates to something else determining your pathway.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
Well, and we're training kids. So I remember maybe 4 years ago, someone I had met who is a professor of education, and trying really hard, like her identity as a professional was someone who was looking out for student well-being, but felt that technology, like that just happened to be her path, was educational technology, right? And then once she walked pretty far down the path and she realized it got a bit muddy, right? And trying to back up and navigate when you've invested a lot of yourself into this world and your professional identity. And then what do you do next when you realize you didn't realize you were walking into the outside-in robot? So I remember her posting about sort of these new kinds of educational toys, which are robots that the children can draw, but instead of kids just drawing a picture to draw a fun picture, they're actually drawing the path for the toy robot. And if you have a second, I'm just going to show you like a short clip of how this works.
Continue to pet tracker.
Pet tracker, correct.
So guys, I'm going to make a basic track on this big piece of paper.
All right, cool.
Go!
Go, Robert. Oh, it's a wavy path track.
Guys, this is my basic track.
Cool.
Now we start. Where's the robot?
Look at that. Oh! He turned around and then he go back again. He followed the track. He actually followed the track. Go, go.
Oh, that time he done it.
Oh, he did it. He did it. Go, go. Go, go, Robert. Go, go, Robert. Go, go.
All right. So I think you get the picture.
Well, so interesting, right? It's actually the other way around. So
Right.
they've got the boy playing with the robot, teaching it to follow a track, but it's actually going to be a robot designing your path through the educational system toward your job fitness. The more data it gets, the more tightly it's going to narrow your track and aim you at the most beneficial place where you can do the most, I keep making quotes, sorry, where you can do the most good for everyone. But I can imagine it getting tighter and tighter the more data that it has about you, about determining your pathway. So like the complete flip of that.
Yeah. Well, and he would be, the boy is learning that it's okay to make a path.
Yeah.
It's empowering. Like, and they're going to say, you'll get to be the path maker, only that they're going to flip it. And even just the drawing, like, I mean, one of my favorite things as a kid was, it was such a treat. Like a couple times a year, you might get the pack of 64 crayons. Now I know that crayons has its own issues, but like all the colors and the pointy points and like they weren't broken yet. And like the potential of that. And yet now it's like, here's a marker, but I don't actually want you to draw a picture. I'd rather you just draw a track. Like it's just a tool, but it's not a tool for the imagination per se. It's a tool for a functional purpose, which is to train the robot. And it's so limiting.
Yeah, very limiting. But it kind of acclimates you to the idea that tracks and robots and somebody drawing a path is cool and fun.
Yeah.
Until you find out you're the robot and like the path is being drawn for you, but you've acclimated to it.
Right. And so now I just have a short clip. So this is from Elizabeth Phelps, the woman at the emotion, cognitive neuroscience affected computing person at Harvard.
So I was interested in understanding human behavior broadly. So I trained initially in psychology and cognition, but then realized looking at the brain was going to be a very powerful way to help us understand cognition. And I retrained in neuroscience. For the past several years, I've been specializing in how emotion changes how we learn and remember. And of course, one of the consequences of learning that something's emotional is that we're going to make different choices. And so I got to this field because I became interested in how what I'm studying about emotion and learning relates to the choices we make. I mean, we assume, of course, when we find out something's fearful or rewarding or something like that, we're going to make a different choice. And when I got into looking at choices, much like Paul found, the psychology of decision making has merged quite a bit with economics, and that got me into thinking about economics and collaborating with economists. So I came at this more from just the psychological perspective of understanding how it is when we learn things, emotion changes them, and how that changes the choices that we make. And in doing this, I'm just starting to really learn about economics and collaborating with economists and understanding this perspective. And it's given me sort of the theoretical and computational aspects of economics is now adding something to my psychological and neuroscience work that wasn't there previously. So I see the merging of the two enhancing both fields. And, you know, the first 5 or 10 years, you could easily argue we didn't learn a whole lot about the study of cognition from studying the brain. Certainly since then, I think almost everyone would disagree with you. And so I think this field's very, very young, and I think we'll start to see where this is going to benefit economics and in ways that I don't think we can predict right now. Certainly psychiatry, you know, we can't argue this hasn't had a huge influence on things like psychiatry and other fields, and I think that's going to be true for economics in ways that may be hard for us to answer today.
That's interesting, right? We don't know. Maybe nobody told them about the human capital bonds. They were coming out right around that time, right?
Yeah, how the study of cognition can benefit economics, and economics can benefit oh my God. Well,
wow. And so I don't know if you heard the part of her saying emotion affects decision making. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And I think we know that because when we're in a heightened state of emotion, either like happy, you know, manic, sad, angry. Yeah. Like that's part of the, what are you listening to and clouding your view? Like you're responding for something that is your internal life, that the messaging that you're dealing with may or may not originate in you, you know, like, and so manipulating those emotions is very powerful. For them to be able to, at a neural level, know how to manipulate your emotions and push your buttons is quite something. Because emotions have a powerful impact on your life. So they want to figure out how to manipulate them to benefit their program. It's just such like a using kind of, like a way to use a person's emotions to benefit their program. Because they know how powerful those emotions are and what effect they have on decision making. It's a little horrific. I mean, but the thing is, it's all done by people like, and we'll talk about this later, not that they're bad people, but it's at these high levels, right? These are people with fancy degrees and multiple degrees and, you know, in connected networks. These are not, you know, fly by. I mean, it's it's just spoken of in such a matter-of-fact way. So so down here, I added in a couple things. So CocoTube1 Zakazny had mentioned in the comments on my blog post about these clips about the bank, and that like in their community, there was a small bank that had gotten bought out several times and ultimately became a division of the Sigmund Freud University. And the Sigmund Freud University is a private school. It was started in like 2003, and its headquarters is in Vienna, but now it has multiple outposts in Berlin and Linz and Ljubljana and Paris. And so it's growing, and they're just churning out psychiatrists because guess what? Like they know people are going to probably fall apart if they tell them like, you have to, you know, we're now going to be the slime molds, you know, with blockchain mind files, like exploring out into outer space or something. People are like, no, I can't even believe it. we know you're going to flip out a little bit when we get you in the game, but we're working on generating enough psychiatrists to handle Exactly. That's exactly what's happening. And so I think, like, again, the connection here is that this whole event is being held in an institute that's housed in the Psychoanalytic Institute of New York, which is the oldest such society in North America. And that's, the teachings of Sigmund Freud, who was looking at the structure of the psyche, that is, as he understood it, the id, which was this sort of primitive, something you don't even think about, the superego, which is the moral conscious, and the ego that's mediating between the two. And I think increasingly the superego, like the moral conscience, they want to overlay into the AI smart contract layer, right? They want us to like hand over the agency of morality into something that's codable. And all of this was just bringing back to me when I'm hearing about emotion and decision making. This person who mentioned Sigmund Freud University also brought up that they were, this university was a partner in an EU-funded project in like 2009 or 10 called Changing Perceptions of Security and Interventions. It was funded by the EU. So again, Changing Perceptions of Security and Interventions. And I didn't know what that was. It took me a while. It's still kind of unclear. This project started in 2008. And it said the goal was to provide governments and organizations with a methodology to increase insight into determinants of actual and perceived security, and into which interventions are effective for increasing security. And I didn't know if they meant like cybersecurity, like what kind of security were they talking about? It was vague. And so then I found a slide share that said, oh, it's actually social sciences. So it isn't so much cybersecurity, it's actually around our own feelings of security. And they're after that. And they have a number of different partners, including this institute was a partner. And, what they were looking at was, and, if you imagine optics and photonics and blockchain and crystals, you'll see in this image, it's a, I don't know, it has a set of 4 layers of interlocking grid cubes in rainbow colors that are like measure 4 by 4 by 4 cubed. It's this cube of all these colors. And they said that they're developing a morphology, I guess, of security and a data warehouse. And they're working on the data collection and analysis of security in this cultural context. And then later on in the set, they're looking at different cultures and what they think about security in Austria, in France, in Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, Spain, and the UK, and how it differs. And I mean, Cliff, it's quite clear to me that these investigations are about the cyber physical system. Like if you're going to have a babysitter that is your cyber physical network, and I've done some other research in this refugee project, it needs to know what your culture is. What does your culture consider security? And so it breaks it out for different, countries as far as, in Germany, the academic approach to security research centers technological science. In France, security as a symbol for crisis management is independent from the source of origin. In Austria, security is seen as a national symbol. Like they have all these things that somehow they're going to put into their, 4-block rainbow cubed data modeling warehouse. And I feel increasingly like what they're looking at managing our security around is our own internal sense of well-being in internally to ourselves and in society. And so I've pulled up here this Voronoi polyhedra again, being like, this is our digital twin. They want to push that.
Like they teach an AI to speak in all these different languages, right? They have these little devices that you could hold. You say it in English and it'll say it in Japanese or this. So like they're teaching AI what the security considerations are culture by culture so that it can speak to your security concerns, like speak your language of security in order to manage you.
Yeah. And I think if we understand, you were the one who brought my attention to that early article, like over a year ago, about DNA being a fractal antenna. Yeah. And some of these people we'll be talking about later, they're like high level technology, emerging technology, photonics experts who are now looking into sort of electromedicine and biofield tuning and photonics in the brain and things that literally, if we imagine that we are sort of vibrating crystals like this Voronoi pattern over here, and if they can use emotion to affect memory, to affect decision making, to affect how we absorb behavior, like how we absorb information from others. Like, last night, Jason and I just streamed our update about our trip that we're postponing until March, but sort of lamenting that people can't hear the story we're trying to offer. But these people know that they can use emotion to erase things you thought you knew. Like how is it that I can have a 3-hour conversation with someone about who really seems to get the contours of what we're talking about, and then within a few days later, and this has happened to me repeated, like offer up something that clearly is in direct contradiction or inconsistent. Like, did they not remember that we had the conversation, or the content? Was it blocked? Did it get manipulated on how it stayed in their psyche through some sort of frequency, or some sort of like some other listening that came into their mind after we had the conversation that was more emotional, or that triggered an emotion in a certain way that overwrote the previous conversation? Like, it's quite interesting to think, because I feel like they do have access. And you've talked about, what are you listening to? And I'm thinking, okay, crystal radio. Today I thought, well, let me look up what is the deal with the crystal radios I've always heard. I didn't realize that Bose was from India. Sir Jagadish Chandra Bose, 1858 to 1937. He was also a plant scientist. He was, and the father of Bengali science fiction. He proved the power of feeling in plants and response in living and non-living, and worked on radio science. And so he had this very basic radio resonating through a crystal. No power, just a transmission and a headset. The crystal. If we are crystalline things, if we are listening, if we are the radio, if we're made up of tessellations, I've talked in the past about like Roger Penrose and tiling and consciousness and crystallography, and what they may be looking at is organizing us as crystals for computation or communication. We need to be aligned and resonating in a certain way. And I feel like the messaging through propaganda, possibly frequency, possibly these sensor networks, is pulling that. And this is quite an interesting paper from 2006 talking about communities as crystals, using issues like segregation in neighborhoods and the way people make choices about housing. And this was in the 1960s, to the emergence of crystalline structures mathematically. And who are nodes, and where are they growing, and what energy are they transferring? And they are modeling social relations as crystals. They really are. Like, I'm not making this up. This is how they are experimenting. They say that the paper is called A Physical Analog of the Schnelling Model. We present a mathematical link between Schelling's socioeconomic model of segregation and the physics of clustering. We replace the economic concept of utility, and that's something these folks in the neuroeconomics talk a lot about, by the physics concept of a particle's initial energy. As a result, cluster dynamics is driven by the surface tension force. The resultant segregated areas can be very large and can behave like spherical liquid droplets, or as a collection of static clusters in frozen form. This model will hopefully provide a framework for studying many spatial economic phenomena that involve individuals making location choices as a function of the characteristics and choices of their neighbors.
Yes, surface tension, societal attention, surface tension, and internal energy. So, so viewing us as as a kind of a crystal actually makes a lot of sense. So on some energetic level, our internal biological processes are reminiscent of how crystals behave. So the math works out that all of this biological flow that makes up who we are, you can address it in the language of crystallography, and it's actually kind of highly accurate. So develop, yeah.
It's kind of amazing. I mean, I feel like that they're modeling this stuff. And so when you're looking at neuroeconomics, I think it's important to understand the crystallography aspect and the social physics, that it is a dynamic of physics that they're working on. And I couldn't help myself, but I added in an image from this Monsters Inc. Because a lot of this, the conclusion of this film, which is based on an energy source of monsters jumping out of closets and scaring children, and they harness their screams and put them in a yellow canister to power stuff, right? Like they're like, talk about like, and this is Pixar, right? And I've had these conversations about the origins of Pixar. But at the end they realized, oh, we can actually get more energy out of a laugh.
That's being nice about it, right? Like trying to be nice.
No, but if you understand what I've kind of talked about previously about, let me see, the felicific calculus, right? We've got Bentham, right? It's a happiness. It's an authentic happiness metric. We can measure pleasure and pain, and we can create equations based on that. And so in that way, like they'll say, we'll make you happy, right? That's come into our robot. You'll be happy here. You won't even notice all the bad stuff out there, because we'll make sure you don't see it, or you don't notice it, or you don't remember it. And so the sickness in the Bentham felicific calculus model is that he was promoting workhouses for paupers, poor people, including their children, and that their idea for play was that there was a pivoting stage that was a wooden structure with a like an offset, like a counterweight. And the children were all aligned based on like height or weight or age, so that it was a certain consistency. And then they would run up the hill, and in running up the hill, it would push the counterweight down. So literally they were powering things from the play of the children in the workhouses under the felicific calculus of happiness program. Sure, you can play, but while you're playing, we're gonna make sure that we get something out of you. We're gonna bleed the energy of your play. It's a good resource. The energy generated by your play, we can use that. Right. So so the laugh, the containers of laughing is maybe not so great. So let me just see. So I wanted to take a minute and read about The View. Do you mind? Do you want to read it, or would you like for me to read it aloud? I have it printed out.
Oh, yeah. No, I have it right here on my phone.
Have it? You want to read it? Okay. So this is hearkening back. So emotion, cognition, memory, resonant crystals. Last time we were here, we were talking about WGBH Boston and educational television, including Sesame Street and Frontline. And what are you listening to? Where is it coming from? In that case, WGBH Boston was the Lowell Institute. That was textile mills that were trying to lure young women off the farm to come in and work in the factories with the idea that they would better themselves. So they were listening to a story that turned out was not actually fully accurate. When they got there, they were worked really hard and they didn't have the opportunities they thought they were going to get. So the listening through radio and TV and other idea and frequencies is really important. So I wanted to make sure we had a chance to for Cliff to read some writing that he had put together about listening.
Yes, this intersection of listening and stories, right? So, for a story to be told, you need to have a listener. And they're looking at how, when they look at you internally, like your internal condition, there's a kind of a crystal formation that they can make out of, how your biology presents, that gives a sort of picture of you as a crystal, or as a listening, right? And so early broadcast was based on transmission through a crystal, and early learning is all about the stories that come into the crystalline listening that you are, right? Who wrote the story? What was their purpose? All of that, but but the point is, you're this sort of listening crystal, and they can model it with physics, and it's a fairly accurate way to consider someone that you. And so this thing that says that DNA is a fractal antenna, right down to the level of the bits that make up your DNA. It possesses all of the characteristics of what they call a fractal antenna, so that at the level of your DNA, you are a listening, right? A fractal antenna. It's designed as a kind of listening DNA. So this is and I want to say about the crystals that we were showing, there were always these black lines around them. And if you think of those black lines, there was another image with Kermit the Frog, and there were these lines. It was a balloon in a parade, and these lines were manipulating the big puppet that Kermit was floating in the sky. The lines you see surrounding the crystals in their research are lines of influence. And a lot of this research is, how do we influence through surface tension, through social pressure, through stories, the internal condition of your crystal, the internal condition of your listening. And so a lot of manipulation through these, lines of influence. Okay, so done. So I'll go ahead and read it now. Your view is just a view. It's not the world. It's a story that you live in. You're the author of it. It's the window you choose to look out of, the lens in the frame you bought when you were thinking. You're responsible for your view. No one is forcing you to have it, yes? It's how you choose freely to see, right? Or maybe not. Maybe your view is under the influence of whatever it is you're listening to when you're thinking. But even then, aren't you the one choosing to listen to that influence? Maybe not. Maybe you don't have the ability to notice the attempts to influence you in what you think of as the privacy of your own mind. Maybe you think it's different in there, than it is in the world, where you're bombarded with attempts to influence your ideas about everything. Maybe you don't think there's anything attempting to influence you internally, but only outwardly, externally, on the TV and in all forms of media. Here's a thought exercise. What if the world is the reflective surface of ideas in mind? What if the world you see is the reflection of your ideas about it in your mind? And what if, just like in the actual world, just as in the reflection you call the world, someone's view is always under the influence of something? It might be helpful to pay more attention to what's attempting to influence you, externally and internally, if you can manage that, than it is to share the contents of your fantasies, dreams, and imagination about what you do in an imaginary world where you could do whatever you want. Yeah, so it's a short piece of writing. It deserves a little bit of a longer conversation. But what I'm trying to point to is that when they're looking at your listening, when they're looking at your DNA, which is a fractal antenna, when they're looking at all the biological systems that a crystal format is a good way to consider them, they're looking at you as a kind of listening. Mm-hmm. And they know that emotions are a powerful way to shape what it is you listen to. So they want to get some control, some behavioral control, sponsor, ignite certain emotions to cause your listening to focus where they would like it to focus. Because again, they want to build the pathway for you. So here's Allison laying out this groundwork that says, look, here are these folks. They understand the power of stories, and you're listening. They understand the power of those stories to move you. Everything from Monsters, Inc. to Sesame Street to all the early programming. So you've been absorbing stories in your listening, modeled as a crystal by physics, but still, accurate down to your DNA as a kind of listening. And all these stories have been coming at you. And what I'm trying to say in this piece is, that it's kind of easy to imagine that all these stories, like what they called surface tension, are actually designed to kind of move you and shape you, to behaviorally train you to walk a pathway in a game that they've designed. And so if you just listen to the story and go along with the story and follow where it goes, you're not aware that you're in a game. You're being directed on purpose. They showed you this cartoon on purpose to ignite this emotion, to move you along in this pathway. And when you get a sense that the world is always attempting to influence you through story by what you're listening to, there's this other option, which is to look internally and notice that what you think about, that what you think of as your own thinking, that in the space of mind, not coming at you from the world, but if you quiet down, turn away from all the stories in the world, there's a topography, a spaciousness, a landscape of mind. And in it, there are also influences that are attempting to affect you through the stories that they tell you. So in the space of mind is as rich and full of stories meant to influence you as is the world that you walk around in. So first it's easier to see it out in the world. And this is, a big part of what Allison's saying is like, look at their story that they're telling themselves. Look at the story that they're telling you. It's not like really what they're up to. They're trying to drive you on. So using stories and the emotions they give rise to drive behavioral movement. And I'm saying that's happening in the world. We can see it clearly. Allison shows it. And I'm saying it's also happening internally. And when you sit still and you're thinking, there are these influences. Some of them, like we're swimming in culture. Allison and I have been talking a lot about being unconscious of the environment that we're just in. It's all around us, whispering to us, telling us stories, telling us what it likes, what it doesn't like. Anyway, so I have this thing that I share with people, which is to, kind of pay more attention to what it is you're listening to. What are the qualities of whatever the story is that coming at you? Is it trying to make you afraid, like to move you with the emotion of fear? When I notice that that's what a movie's trying to do, I'm like, I back away from it. Like, I don't want you to manipulate me through a fearful narrative. And then when I listen internally, some of what I think of as my thoughts, I hear a story being told that's meant to cause me to be afraid. And so before I just react to it and go along with it and get afraid and look around, I just notice it as a story in the space of mind, just as I can notice a story in the world on the television. We can learn to notice them in mind as well. And we can have our agency comes into play when we say we can make some choices about what stories we're going to inhabit, right? And they want us very much to inhabit their story of what's next for humanity. Like, come on, we're going to, Satan's promise, we're going to get you all to heaven. They make, all kind of outrageous promises. Come live in our story.
Well, and there's multiple stories going on at the same time that are geared to different people.
Yes. Yeah. So it's a lovely intersection between what I'm drawn to explore and Allison's this work is that, like looking at that crystal and recognizing that they're aware it has an internal condition and that the surface tension is made up of lines of influence coming at it, stories coming at it. So we wind up in a lovely conversation about listening and whose stories are we listening to, And so, we have this thing between us as friends. When somebody has a little bit of an outburst, right, we say to ourselves, whoa, what are they listening to? Rather than make them wrong for whatever it is that they said, rather than, react and be reactive or judgmental or whatever. We're starting to have this language between us where somebody can have an outburst and we're just like, whoa, having an outburst. I wonder
sometimes it's us.
Yeah, sometimes it's each other. Like we'll say to each other, what are you listening to?
Like, don't turn that channel. Like, we don't.
Yeah. So anyway. So I love paying attention to Allison's research. Sometimes the details might feel a little bit of, overwhelming to me, but the story that's emerging, the structure that's emerging, and what she's saying about it is like she's introducing me to this grand story being told by all these like super quote smart, rich people about what we ought to do in life. And when I hold it just as a story, I'm like, I've got a much better story going on about what we should do with life. I don't feel compelled to conform and be good in their story because I'm aware of it as a story. It's, so really interesting.
Well, I sort of feel like we're like, it would stretch to go on to start to talk about the couple of other people. Like and I feel like, so maybe the next transition is we'll talk about a couple of other people in the room who I think have interesting backstories that would be interesting to imagine, like some of the story that they were inhabiting as they were developing their professional class.
That's a great frame. Yeah. What stories were they listening to as they were developing that class? Yeah.
Yeah. And I do just want to say, so I have, when I share this, I will include on the next blog post, this conversation, as well as the remaining clips that I had made from the neuroeconomics. I have a really nice discussion going on the first blog post. And honestly, and I will take ownership of this. Like, I haven't been super participatory in responding conversationally to comments. And so I'm going to try to do that more. And people really stepped up when I said, what do you think? What are you hearing? So I do want to just thank, again, Bill had a really nice comment about the engineered minds and the lack of spirit. Roderick commented on all of the clips, which was amazing, and had some really interesting ideas. He was the one who directed me to the Human Energy Project, which turned out to be super helpful and relevant. So that was a whole other part of the clip. And I just want to look. Paul had a link to something about neuroeconomics, a paper. And let me just see. I just want to look and see if I can find Roderick's other comments. I just want to mention just some other things if people want to go and check out the comments. Among Roderick's observations about these neuroeconomic clips, so this is just a sneak peek for the next time, he raised he talked about a paper called Distributed Cognition from Local Brains to the Global Brain. Wow. About how sensor technologies would individually feed information to this large brain and feed back in affected computing through smart contracts. So I will say this is maybe an example, Cliff, from his comments, not about how a classroom would affect a child, but how, like, Vision Zero is one of these programs that's like no pedestrian accidents, right? So it's giving them essentially free license to put sensors all over all of the street corners. And so this is from Roderick, and I'm just going to read this if this is okay. It says, let us imagine that most pedestrians, cyclists, car drivers have emotion sensors linked to their location information. Suddenly, a car makes a huge acceleration, a lot of noise without any other reason than showing off. A dozen drivers, pedestrians, and bikers get stressed out. This emotional feedback is anonymized and could be sent directly to the dangerous driver or processed by the police. The driver could lose points on his license or incur increased premiums on his insurance.
They could teach him how to be good.
Yeah. And it could be that everyone is wearing a sensor for their emotion, and they would have to feel like, oh my gosh, my would affect this guy, right? And they might not even, it might have been involuntary reaction to like a loud noise, but won't you be my sensor? The global brain says, won't you be my sensor? And
please take my emotional landscape and help me navigate the world, because, like, shout at the other driver for me, Oh, good Lord.
Right. And then he goes on to talk a little bit about order out of chaos with cybernetics, through Pavlov and Skinner. And then he says on one of the clips, at this point, it is very clear how important it will be the ubiquitous network of effective computing and enabled sensors for economic modeling and the distribution of tokens and badges according to the emotions enacted from social interactions. You lose or win tokens depending on how you adjust your behavior to the pre-established set of rules.
Yeah, he's really up to speed. Like, he's really tracking the conversation. That's great.
Yeah. The dangerous driver digital twin could prevent predictive maintenance from nanorobotic releases of specific hormones in the digital twin to prevent him from showing off.
Yeah.
Nanomedicine. I hadn't gone as far as nanomedicine, Roderick, but that's
welcome to managed life in the metaverse.
Right. And
Wow.
yet the irony is in some of this, again, because the conversation has been so focused on digital dollars, they want your digital dollars, they want your Chinese social credit score, that like the people who might be most equipped to resist the co-optation of sacred practice, institutions of faith, are going to be sold on freedom through tokenization. And like, well, maybe your church could make people good. We have a program for you. You could be an affiliate of our special colored token program, and you could chime in, right? And so this is something I've been really trying to get at with communities of faith broadly, is within the cybernetic system, are you going to be the one who picks up Satan's proposal, right? Yeah. Are you going to be the one that says, oh, we know good for you. We can make sure we make you do that. We can control your food and shelter and water and whatever to make you do the thing. And to get really clear about that before it happens, because I think that day may not be too far off. So it would behoove us to pivot or expand our view from simply central bank digital currency and digital passports, health passports, into the tokenization of behavior and cyber physical systems.
And then the felt experience of loss, like what are the costs of engaging in that system for a person when they step into it? Well, one of the costs is you have to like set your imagination down, and you have to gird yourself to conform, like for people to be able to feel that, to be in there. They'll teach you how to be good, but don't wear that rock and roll shirt. Don't, put your imagination down and get in the uniform and conform. Like just that sense of loss, like, oh, put your wild side away, put your like, I'm not going to be good today away, your imagination, like stay focused and be good. So this.
And the be good within an insane entity. Like in the face of insanity, like that will gaslight you every day.
Well, it's not even human. I mean, they're agreeing, faith-based institutions are agreeing to be managers of the Be Good program, because, they're already in the code of conduct kind of behavioral training mindset. But it's not even like where they want to direct you. They're going to coach you in the Be Good world, because they're kind of set up to be good coaches for that. But the game that they're going to be coaching you to conform to is being managed by this artificial life.
Right. They're just going to be a franchise.
Yeah, it's a franchise for behavioral training for the artificial system. Oh, that doesn't sound like church, like, whew.
No, exactly. So, yeah. Well, thank you for joining me in this conversation, Cliff. I really appreciate it. We have like more exciting things to talk about. Like, I want to talk about Paul and Lauren a little bit next, and a little bit just a sneak preview on how Vietnam strategic Hamlet program, slime mold, and
I love
Society 5.0 all sync together.
Yeah, you're going to have to hang out, but you're going to really like the slugs and snails and slime mold conversation, because they're modeling how. I'm not even going to say it in front. It's fun though. It's fun. That's
and Mr. Ant-Man, right? Mr. Ant-Man.
Yeah, and again, I just want to say thank you, like, for you extending your interest and asking people to speak into it. And I just want to thank those people who heard you and said, oh, I'll watch a clip and I'll let you know what I think, and then look at the interesting people that came forward, and they were very insightful and pointing to it. And so it's just a nice engagement. Yeah, really nice.
Yeah. And like I said, last night, I had a few asks about this. Walk around the labyrinth. What does it look like from your view, like where you are? And I had a handful of people reach out and say they were interested. And I love to kind of, again, I'm not looking for assistance, but like friends, collaborators, and I can help show you how I do it and see if it works with you. And then we can kind of walk around together. So,
and that might even be, I think that could be a whole discrete conversation. It doesn't even have to be super long, but this idea about, looking around the labyrinth. What does the dynamics of that look like? Like how is it you want to be in relationship with people as you together with them look around the labyrinth? I think it's a great conversation. It's an evolving of your relational, your friendships and relationships with people in this work. And I'm getting really clear about it. And so I think that's a conversation that deserves to be had. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Cliff.
Thank you. Have a great day.